Hey guys, welcome to Get Busy Watching. I'm your host, Honest Dan. Let's talk movies.
I have something for you from your dad.
It's a wizard staff. Holy toot of Zadar! How did you...
I don't know, it just started!
Dad?
Just no top part. Dad, you are in your house. Oh, boy. We've only got 24 hours to bring back the rest of Dad. We're going on a quest.
Before seeing this, I didn't have the highest of hopes, mostly because I just didn't agree with the concept. I mean, throwing in fantasy characters into the modern world, it just felt like a really lazy world to give us. What kind of possibilities could there have possibly been? And the jokes from the trailer seem to prove me right. The centaur cop counts by tapping his hoof even though he seems completely capable of speaking the numbers. The pixies are violent jerks.
Cornish pixies.
I just wasn't seeing the creative possibilities here, especially with Soul on the horizon, which looked infinitely better. I went into this with pretty low expectations. Now, I wasn't expecting anything bad per se, but to put it into perspective of what my expectations were. Soul gives me Inside Out vibes, and Inside Out is my favorite Pixar film. Onward gives me Good Dinosaur vibes, and Good Dinosaur is not one of my favorite Pixar films. In the past, they were one thing, but time later, they started living like people do. It was hitting very similar notes. But now that I've seen the movie, what do I think? I was mostly pretty wrong. The opening was actually really clever. Magic was widely known, but only a few people could use it, and it was difficult to master. Then someone developed the light bulb and essentially made a magic that everyone could do. More things are invented until we reach the modern age where magic is a myth. I was actually okay with how we got to this modern era, but then the cracks started to appear. The world itself makes very little sense. Take the very basic car. Nothing wrong with it, right? This makes sense for the elves, cyclopses, and satyrs because they're humanoid with proportions similar to humans. The vehicles make sense that they're made for them. But centaurs drive those very same cars. They don't have vehicles specifically tailored to their proportions? Why not get creative in that way? Imagine a car designed for centaurs or the manticore or the ogres, orcs, what are those guys again? The possibilities should be endlessly weird. But do you know why there aren't any unique vehicles in this world? Because it's funny to see a centaur get out of a car in a funny way. So of course when the centaur cop, his name is Colt, comes into the house, of course he has clumsy movements that knock things over and break.
Oh no.
I feel like you can just smell the fishing for obvious jokes. These are the jokes that are meant for little kids' movies, not Pixar. I know I'm nitpicking details here, but I expect Pixar to be wildly creative in their endeavors. And I just feel like there was a slew of missed opportunities here. Then we're introduced to the main characters. Ian, voiced by Tom Holland, Barley, voiced by Chris Pratt, and their mom, Laurel, voiced by Julia Louis-Dreyfus. These moments are also pretty hit and miss. While the chemistry between voice actors is rather great and feels like the dynamic of a real family, I didn't always agree with the characterizations. Ian felt like he was your typical socially awkward nerd who didn't know how to talk to people, getting his words wrong, tripping over them while awkwardly laughing. It's the typical stuff that every socially awkward character does. In this respect, the comedy falls flat on its face like a failed QuickTime event in a Spider-Man game. The only character that I feel like I truly got invested in right away was Barley. Yeah, he's a super nerd who plays a Dungeons & Dragons-like game and talks like an epic warrior hero, but the writing was smart enough to know when to make this quirk endearing and when to pull it in and allow the character to be, well, a character. More than just being a super nerd, he's also an activist trying to preserve ancient historical sites which he believes still holds magic. At the very least, is passionate about history. I used to have friends like this, excitable, nerdy, but weren't live-action cartoon characters. I say as I describe cartoon characters. Hey, when animated characters are three-dimensional, they're no longer just cartoon characters to me. Not in my book, kiddies. Thankfully, the movie's faults die off relatively quickly for me, right after Ian's day at school where he fails to do everything on his list to make his birthday the best yet. He comes home and he listens to a recording of his father's voice on a cassette tape. Wow, Chris Pratt cannot get away from movies that feature those things, can he? And it also just hit me that this will be the first of 2 Guardians of the Galaxy references that I'll be making. In any case, the moment is quiet and moving. Something that this movie was kind of lacking up to this point. But now the plot kicks off when Laurel gives the boys the wizard staff with the spell that could potentially bring their father back to life. I actually didn't ask this question much before seeing this, but I ended up asking if their dad could hear them despite no upper torso. Turns out, nope, he can't hear them. He can only feel around with his feet and recognizes Barley by the tapping on his foot. So I'm pretty sure the trailers didn't tap into this, but the MacGuffins of the story are these rare gems called Phoenix Gems, which allow their father to be resurrected, as the name implies. The one they had was broken and used up. So now they're setting out to find a new Phoenix Gem. So how do they get started? In a pretty confusing way, actually. I know this Dungeons & Dragons game of theirs is supposed to be based on real historical events in their world, but when you're pulling out cards that almost very specifically say, go to the Manticore's castle, find the map that leads to the Phoenix Gem, that doesn't sound like anything that's based on anything. It sounds like actual and accurate information, especially if it ends up being 100% true. I gotta say though, I really enjoy this scene. In ancient times, the castle was supposed to be scary, where only the bravest warriors dared to venture. Now it's a family-friendly restaurant, with crayons and coloring kids menus and everything. The Manticore, or Corey, voiced by Octavia Spencer because of course one of the most epic women of the last few years would play one of the most epic fantasy monsters, kind of hates it. Spent all this time being an owner of this place, and it only takes one instance with Ian and Barley to have a meltdown, and melt down her entire restaurant. But she's fine later and goes back to being nice. But during that meltdown, the map that the boys need is burned to ash. So instead what they use is the kids' coloring menu, which is based on the real map. And this actually helps them. Okay. Once again, this movie has a seriously aloof sense of what based on means. Like, it's the map. It's been repurposed to be a kid's coloring thing, but it's the map. It's the map. Okay, I'm shutting up. I'm moving on. I think I'm going to stop talking about the movie about here, mostly because I don't want to give everything away, but there are a few more things that I wanted to touch upon. 1. The story is loaded with conveniences. The spells that Ian can do all come out of nowhere and come at the most convenient of times. Quite frankly, I'm surprised there wasn't some sort of teleportation spell. Occasionally, it did kind of feel ridiculous. Thankfully, there's creativity behind these moments to turn those weaknesses to something fairly amusing. Never in my life have I ever asked myself if I wanted to ride a giant Cheeto puff like a boat down a stream, and that I could also eat it. Thank you, Pixar. That's a question I would love to answer. Yes. I also wanted to say that there's a subplot that gets introduced that maybe Ian thinks Barley is something of a screw-up, which comes out of nowhere and doesn't in any way feel justified. There's no moment prior to this that suggests Ian thinks less of his brother in that way, and could be chalked up to more sensible reasons, but we threw this in for added drama that didn't otherwise feel needed. This also extends to when we learned that Barley didn't get to properly say goodbye to their dad because he was hooked up to all those tubes and he was scared. Yup, this is basically recycling Star-Lord's origin story from Guardians of the Galaxy. You thought you could just sneak that in there, Pixar? You thought I wouldn't notice that? Well, I did. I also kind of wish more of their dad's personality shined through with his legs. Make no mistake, I adore that scene where he's dancing horribly with his kids, but I feel moments like this could have been pushed to other aspects and be more than just a set of legs that needs to be walked around on a dog leash. I wouldn't know how you would implement that in a continuous manner, but they had him recognize the feet tapping when he first showed up and had him dance with his kids, so if the creativity existed there, it could have been done again. I also have to question the logic of what happens when the boys find that second gem. So the spell lasts a day, the resurrection spell. So how come when they do find that second gem and cast that spell again, it doesn't renew the day? What did I miss? Overall, I know I spent a lot of time crapping on the movie instead of praising it, but these issues really did stand out for me, and I felt like they needed to be spotlighted, or at the very least, made fun of. But in all seriousness, if you were to ask me which is better between this, Onward, which is about brothers, or the Frozen movies, which is about sisters, I would have to say that this is better. I say this because the bond between Elsa and Anna took 2 movies to really kick off. The first movie barely had them interact at all. Frozen 2 fixed that problem, but the movie as a whole felt subpar. Onward at least made the brotherly relationship front and center, and no less for more relatable and personal reasons that are far easier to get behind, and the emotional impact is far greater. The ending to this movie is bold and will likely stick with me long after Frozen 2. In a vacuum, though, Pixar's latest outing is actually pretty good. It's imperfect, of course, and perhaps it's not Pixar's best film, but where it gets things right, it's more than enough to hold it up to a higher standard. And whatever flaws it does have, it's not going to stop me from saying that I recommend it. My honest rating for Onward, a 4 out of 5. Thanks so much for watching, you guys. I really appreciate it. Have a great day. Hope to see you soon.